Hello and welcome to the Rogers Brief. I'm Adam Rogers. Thank you for watching and thank you for listening if you're catching this on Apple or Spotify podcast. I'm going to give you my analysis of the Mass Casualty Commission's Interim Report, which was just released this afternoon. This is May 2nd, and the report was 171 pages in a PDF document. Which was quite long. 84 of those pages, or 80 or so of that, was actual content. The rest were appendices. Some of the decisions and other documents that the Mass Casualty Commission has already produced were included in the report to give it that 171 page length. But interesting, it was released late in the day today. It was sometime after 4 o'clock. I only saw it. Well, I wouldn't have been able to read it any earlier. I was doing a board meeting for Engage Nova Scotia until about 4 o'clock. But I thought it was interesting. I was kind of watching for it to be released during the day because we knew it was going to be released and posted to the website today. And I thought it was interesting and maybe not surprising that it was released late in the day, too late to make any of the evening news programs here in Atlantic, Canada. So that was an interesting decision on their part. Not wanting the interim report, which is sort of a major milestone in a commission such as this, to make the news. So my summary of it is this. This report could have been written and may have been written before proceedings started. There was nothing in this report that was new or seemed to be in any way a reaction to what we've been seeing in the public proceedings. And I'll talk about that, what I mean, a little bit. Probably, if anybody was familiar with the Mass Casualty Commission's website and has sort of navigated their way through there, that's close to 90% of at least what is in this report. The rest of it is sort of summaries and sort of connecting paragraphs and pages for those items that are already in the public sphere through the Commission's website. So they broke the report into sort of four major sections and then one small section at the end. They talked about the background of the Mass Casualty Commission, how it was formed, talked about designing the inquiry, that they laid out the vision and values of the Mass Casualty Commission, well, the commissioners, I should say, that they were going to take a restorative approach, as we all know, and a layered approach, as they describe it. So they talk about that, how that's been designed. We all were familiar with that now. And they talk about phase one being the evidentiary phase. So they called it building the core evidentiary foundation. And then phase two, which is part 4 of the report, which we've just kind of started doing now in real time, of what they call broadening the lens and evidentiary foundation. And then the last part was what they call a call for continued engagement. So at the end of this report, they're welcoming people to provide further feedback, answer more questions about impact of the casualty events and everything else. So like I say, there was, and this was more or less as I predicted a few times in the last week, if you've been watching the videos, there were no findings of fact. And that, I think, is an appropriate thing for this report. Appropriate in that we haven't really achieved in any part of the 13 and a half hours, we haven't completed the factual evidence for any part yet. So it would be premature for the commission to be making any findings of fact. They went a step further. They didn't talk about any of the evidence at all. There was no discussion of any evidence that has been heard, any of the factual witnesses, foundational document material, anything relating to the mass casualty itself. None of that evidence was discussed whatsoever in this report. They also refrained from making any recommendations, which again is also appropriate at this stage because it would be premature. Now they do talk about, they signal that they're going to talk about the alert ready system, as we could all have imagined, and they talked about that for a few paragraphs just to say, okay, here's how we're going to do these things. They have some evidence on the alert ready system, how that is supposed to work, or what the capabilities of the system might be or may have been and are now. And then they'll have an expert report that discusses how that should work. And at the end, they'll make a recommendation in that area. So they sort of walk through how that will work, but again, didn't mention any of the specifics of the case in doing so. in the report as well, they talk about the process, and we've all seen this. They talk about the difference between an inquisitorial process and an adversarial process. The adversarial process is what we're used to seeing in civil trials, criminal trials, anything you see on television. You've got one lawyer on one side, one on the other, and their adversarial process unfolds, witnesses, cross-examination, so on. And the inquisitorial process is used in some European countries more so, but it is sort of, imagine the judge directing the trial, directing the investigation, and then making their own conclusions with some assistance from lawyers, but not led by the counsel or tested in the same sort of adversarial format. So they described that. They didn't, in my view, defend their choice of inquisitorial versus adversarial. I think the big part of it is trying to save time and not have extended days of witnesses and the questioning that can go on for some time with that. They also talk about in the report, emphasize how the commission is an official independent process and how they operate at arm's length. Now, those are two different things because the commission isn't exactly independent. While they do operate at arm's length from government, in other words, government is not directing their day-to-day operations, choices they make, who they should choose for investigators or staff or whatever. But the government could, because of the structure of an inquiry, they could amend the orders in council. They could cancel the entire thing at any point, and that is a government decision. So it is not the case that the Mass Casualty Commission is independent of government. They're completely dependent on government, but they operate independently, and there's a distinction there that's certainly relevant. But I noticed throughout the report, particularly in the early stages, the commissioners seem to be going out of their way to take personal ownership of the Mass Casualty Commission proceedings. They talk about how they chose the team, they chose the investigators, they chose the legal support team that they have around them, a considerable legal support team. They directed the investigation. Remember, they talked about an inquisitorial process. Well, they're involved. The commissioners are involved in choosing, talking about who's going to get interviewed, what topics are going to be covered, how that's all going to unfold. And of course, they designed the process. And so they are the ones that are making the decisions about witness panels, round tables, what I've called the disorienting approach to the evidence presentation. That is the commissioners that are making those decisions. So it was very interesting. They took if anything out of this report, I would say the emphasis they placed on their own authority over the proceedings was noteworthy. All right, so a couple of other things caught my eye. One is that they brought attention to statements that they've been receiving from members of the public about the perceived, at least, lack of mental health support after the mass casualty in the area. The commissioners note that they are they're alive to these issues and they are doing a trauma-informed process, but they are not presenting themselves as mental health service providers. That has to be done by government or other agencies. There are services on site, I understand, and they made a point of mentioning that. And they also mentioned that one of their main goals, especially given the short time frame they mentioned, is of building resilience and capacity in the community to address the long-term mental health implications of a mass casualty such as this. So, not sure how they're going to exactly do that, but that is one of their priorities. They talked about the last thing I'll cover in depth is they talked about the foundational documents and we have all these foundational documents, and yet, of course, they don't reference any of them in making any even preliminary factual determinations for the purposes of this interim report. They do note that the preliminary versions of these foundational documents was these large statement of fact documents that they've been presenting occasionally through commission counsel to the public. The preliminary versions of those were sent to participants in August of 2021, so last August. Remember that we were supposed to start hearings in late October 26th. Didn't start until the 1st of February, in February. So and they talk about these 2 months of meetings. There was 2 months of meetings where legal counsel for all the participants were meeting with commission counsel, going through these foundational documents with the goal of, talking about any discrepancies and all those sort of things. So anybody that's been watching the Mass Casualty Commission proceedings will know that the participants' lawyers have been very critical of those documents and saying that the versions that have been presented to the public bore little relation to what they were provided as draft documents and the ones that they were had seen before. So that was really interesting. I thought a fairly pointed criticism of the commission and the commission process, and really pointed to me that these 2 months of meetings were really a waste of time. There was many complaints about the foundational documents and about the process of trying to come together on these factual narratives. Yet, instead of that, why not? They had these preliminary documents ready in August. They could have said, all right, here they are. These are preliminary. We'll use these as the foundation to question witnesses. All right, put the witness up, question them, allow them to be cross-examined, shorten those examinations by having these foundational documents, identify any mistakes, and just do that. Could have been doing that for 2 months instead of this process, which many of the lawyers involved said was a real waste of time. So I thought that was significant enough that the commissioners would have said something about it directly, but rather than that, they said the interim report says that the meetings were, quote, effective collaborative mechanism. They were an effective collaborative mechanism. I'm not sure the people participating would agree with that. Like I said, complaints were not even acknowledged. And that was a really, I guess, besides the commissioners taking ownership of the situation, the other major, I guess, conclusion or take I have from this report is that there was no acknowledgement whatsoever of critiques that have been directed at the commission. No attempts to refute criticisms that have been out in the public, out in the media, coming from participants, from the families. There was just really no reaction to those. And that's, so when I say, open with saying, well, this report could have been and may have been written prior to the proceedings beginning, that's one of the reasons I say that, is because there's no real acknowledgement that there's been weeks and months now of proceedings where there's been some dispute about the meaning of certain evidence and the usefulness of certain time being spent. So I thought that was interesting too, that wasn't even acknowledged. So the rest of the report, phase 2, they're sort of projecting into the future here because we've just really started that. Some of these reports are available on the commission website, and I've read some of them. I'm talking about policing, community, and violence. Those are sort of the research areas for the future. We're going to see reports coming out on the duty to warn the public, the police that have a certain duty, critical incident decision-making by police, sharing of intelligence between different police agencies, crime in rural communities, particularly, well, they don't say this in the report, but perhaps we'll talk about Wortman's smuggling activities and connections to gangs and other criminal organizations. The psychology of shooters, mass shooters, and, signs of trouble. Things that shooters or killers have in common that a person may be able to observe in advance. So that's, it looks like, we still have some witnesses to hear from with respect to phase 1, the real evidentiary foundation. So that'll take place now for the next while. I'm not sure, weeks, maybe longer. But after that, it sounds like we're going to be seeing witnesses that are providing expert reports and engaging in roundtable discussions on sort of these research topics. So it'll be a real change in procedure. Well, somewhat of a change in procedure for the commission. We'll see. I mean, we'll get through these witnesses. We'll see how that unfolds. So we have some major witnesses this week. Some of the main officers who have been subject to criticism are going to be testifying. So I'll be watching for that. There'll be Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday this week. There's proceedings. So I'll be watching that and providing reports to you. But this was a report from the interim report, required to be provided by the commission. Other than being required, probably not much of a reason to release this report, and so I'll save you the trouble of reading it. That was my summary. I hope you found that useful, and again, thank you for watching, and thank you for participating in all this, and we will see you next time.